Hi guys, welcome to this week's episode of Let's Talk Boxing. I'll be your host as always, and I'm joined by Ewan. It's a bit of a quiet time given that we've had quite a lot of boxing to start off 2021 in February, but we do have a spectacular Matchroom triple header card out in America on DAZN this weekend. But first things first, Ewan, how are you? How's things?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good. Yeah, again, compared to last week when we had two chock-a-block weeks of boxing to get stuck into, it is a bit of a quiet one. But you know, the lower weight magicians we've got at the end of this week, so I'm sure we'll get stuck into talking about that.
Definitely, I think this rematch is years in the making. Juan Estrada against Roman Gonzalez, Chocolatito. It's the unified super flyweight world title fight. I think they fought first back in 2012. And like you said, we'll get into that a little bit later on, but let's get into some of the latest goings on, some of the latest headlines in boxing. And Triller, this boxing platform, this media platform that seems to have come from nowhere and is really making waves in the boxing world. They've come in with a massive, I think it was $6 million bid to win the purse bid for Teofimo Lopez to defend against his IBF challenger, George Kambosos. Ewan, it was quite a spectacular announcement and one that took boxing or the boxing world by storm.
Yeah, it's always a bit of a kind of event when a new player suddenly steps in. Do you remember 3 or 4 years ago, it was DAZN, and suddenly everyone didn't really understand DAZN and the money that was flying into boxing. You know, Triller is some sort of TikTok rival platform in America or something, isn't it? And then suddenly they've decided to become a player in boxing. So you can't underestimate, this sport is a money sport. It's money driven. DAZN came in with their $1 billion for Eddie Hearn, and DAZN, you know, many people said DAZN they're a flash in the pan, they'll go away, but they're here. And again, they're putting on Chocolatito versus Estrada, you know, on Saturday night, which is a boxing purists fight. And now Triller, who have come in with this entertainment thing, you know, they did Roy Jones, they're doing Jake Paul, all of this kind of what I would like to call social media boxing rather than real boxing. But ultimately, DAZN started from a similar sort of place, just money. And then now DAZN are putting on kind of boxing purist fights. Triller seems to be doing the same thing by throwing, what was it, $6 million at Lopez Kambosos. So I think it's a really interesting move. I think they're a player that we need to keep an eye on. But yeah, I think it's big money for a fight which actually doesn't have a big star in it.
Definitely. I think this is where the interesting aspect to that bid comes in. And to put that into context, the $6 million bid from Triller is more than Top Rank. The other two bidders that came in was Top Rank, who are the promotional team of Teofimo Lopez, and Matchroom and Eddie Hearn. Those were the two other bids. And the Top Rank and Matchroom bids combined was less than the $6 million Triller won the purse bids with. So to put that into a little bit of context, it's kind of surreal. I've seen interviews and quotes from both Lopez and Kambosos there, you know, licking the lips at the prospect of how much they're going to get paid for this fight, because it's way above and beyond what they was expecting. But that begs the question, what's in it for Triller? Are they looking at making maybe a financial loss on this fight to make a bigger gain in terms of what might come in the future? There's talks of a Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield trilogy fight as the headline. You and where do you sit on the fact that the unified lightweight champion in Teofimo Lopez is going to defend his belts on the undercard of a glorified exhibition fight?
It's crazy. It's kind of unthinkable a few years ago, but ultimately $6 million for, you know, if we want our fighters to do well, if we want our fighters to make money, you know, you can't argue. Teofimo Lopez, who, again, I've repeated this hundreds of times on this podcast, but I think he's the future of boxing. I think he's got such an amazing future at several different weights. If that guy gets paid $6 million to start with, to push on with his career, or $3 million, whatever it is, however that works out, that's ultimately a good thing. It's these people that are putting their health on the line for our entertainment. But in response to the thing that you said about Top Rank and Matchroom, who were both kind of in the same sort of 2.5 to 3.5 million ballpark, and it's still a very big ballpark, but that shows an intimate knowledge of boxing and what fights are worth, right? To come in with more than double that shows that they were going to bid that no matter what other people bid. You know, these guys understand boxing. Triller clearly just threw this money at it, knew what they were going to spend, and didn't really bid intelligently to kind of push the market up and win it. They just flew in with an enormous bid. So I think that naivety worries me a little bit in terms of the production of the show, but like you say, it also alludes to something big social media wise on the top of the bill, which I don't want Teofimo Lopez to share a bill. You know, he's undisputed champion. He should always be the headliner now. unless, say, he's on the undercard of Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. That's one of the only fights that can kind of top a Teofimo Lopez fight now. So I don't want to see Anthony Joshua. I don't want to see Tyson and Holyfield 3 on the top of this card. I want to see Teofimo on the top of the card. And ultimately, I think it's about pushing the future of boxing rather than the past. You know, Tyson and Holyfield, they're the past, and they were excellent champions, but they're the past. I think this investment should be seen as an investment for the future, an investment in Teofimo Lopez or indeed George Kambosos.
Bob Arum, as he tends to do, splits opinion. He's a legend of the game, bona fide legend of the game. He's been around since the days of Muhammad Ali, and he's still, you know, he's been voted the most powerful man in boxing with Boxing News. But he wasn't happy with Eddie Hearn this week, and he tends to be quite unhappy with Eddie Hearn quite a lot recently. But he was quite outspoken and critical of Eddie Hearn bidding for this fight. He didn't like the fact that Eddie Hearn placed a bid, which, you know, not taking sides. You know, you can support Bob Arum and Eddie Hearn simultaneously, but I don't think Eddie Hearn done anything wrong bidding for this fight. It was an open market, and I think, you know, Bob Arum needs to take a look in the mirror more than point fingers at somebody else, because if you've let arguably your second or third biggest star after Tyson Fury and Bud Crawford at Top Rank go to purse bids for a mandatory title defence, his first mandatory title defence as well, is quite bizarre. And I don't think he should really be criticising Eddie Hearn when he should have kept his business in-house, and he could have dealt with this himself easily a few months back without letting it go to open purse bids.
I think it's a very good point, I think. But again, Bob, you know what you get with Bob. You get a dogged advocate for your fighters. He's a lawyer. He's an advocate. And he is an advocate for more than anything, Bob Arum. And so if Bob Arum's angry, it doesn't matter whether he's in the right or whether he's in the wrong. He's going to have a go at someone because he's Bob Arum. And that's why he's lasted so long in this business, because he does what he's interested in the top rank business, and he's interested in the guys who want to deal with top rank. If Teofimo doesn't want to deal with top rank, he would much rather throw him or another promoter or anyone under the bus before he throws himself and top rank under the bus. So it's the nature of the longevity that he's had in the game. But yeah, I totally agree. I think, isn't Eddie Hearn Kambosos' promoter anyway?
I'm not sure if he had a finger in the pie to say, you know, after the Lee Selby fight. So, you know, you could be right in saying that.
If he's representing Kambosos, which I suspect he is, then you should have, if you're Bob, you should have expected him to bid on that fight, because if your guy is going up against the best fighter in the world at 135 pounds, then of course he's going to bid on it. So I think that there's a little bit of fun and games there, but I think they're always taking pot shots at each other. I think it's probably part of a wider Joshua and Fury type game.
Definitely, we'll get into that a bit later on, I think. But I think the interesting thing is with Bob Arum, you say, you know, he's stood the test of time and he's been there and he's done it and he's promoted the biggest names in the game. But I think in the year 2021, he needs to get with the times a little bit. And I don't want to sound disrespectful, but when you're alienating the likes of Teofimo Lopez and Bud Crawford, which is the now and the next in terms of, you know, up-and-coming stars, you know, Bud Crawford is solidified. He's either number one or number two at welterweight. Take your pick between him and Errol Spence Jr. And you've got Teofimo Lopez, nicknamed the Takeover, and he is taking over. He defeated Vasily Lomachenko, and he's 23, 24 years of age. He's a brash, outspoken New Yorker. He could go on to become pound for pound number one boxer on the planet, but he could also be the biggest star in boxing. He's got that kind of potential, that mainstream potential, and Bob is going out of his way, it seems, to alienate the likes of Crawford and Teofimo Lopez. And I just don't think it's very savvy, business savvy. You know, we can't sit here and criticise Bob Arum because he knows what he's doing. He's been through it all. But in the year 2021, I think he needs to be careful that, you know, he's not alienating him to the point where they'll no longer work with him, because I know that's very close, especially with Teofimo Lopez. It'd be very unlikely to see him fight in a top-ranked bill again. But then you've got, again, Crawford. You know, these are two elite names. We're not talking about a couple of prospects that are speaking out of line or a couple of guys that are veterans and past it. We're talking about in the prime, pound-for-pound superstars, and he's doing his best to piss them off. Yeah.
Far am I to tell Bob Arum how to promote, but if I had Teofimo Lopez, I'd do anything I wanted to make him happy. You know what I mean? Because I seriously think, like I say, you'd want him. He's the guy you want on side for the next 10 years. I think he's legit. I think he's there. I think he's going to be the next guy. I think he's going to be the next, hopefully, Bud Crawford, but he can do a good interview as well. 100%. I totally agree. I think that I would try and keep him on side at all costs.
Also in the 135-pound division this week, to go off on a bit of an asterisk, there's been a bit of back and forth on Twitter. Lomachenko has seemed to have resurfaced since the loss to Teofimo Lopez, and he's had a bit of a Twitter spat with Devin Haney. Of course, his previous there, because Devin Haney was targeting a clash with Lomachenko when he was the WBC lightweight champion, as it was. Lomachenko applied for the franchise status with the WBC. He was granted that, which led to Devin Haney becoming a two-time WBC lightweight champion by way of being awarded the title, which isn't the way we like to see people win belts. But, you know, you've got to give it to Haney. He was chasing the fight with Lomachenko. He never turned down the fight with Lomachenko. But this week, they've been going back and forth on Twitter. And there seems to be a little bit of a who's gonna fight who kind of situation, because Haney's looking like he's fighting Jorge Linares at one moment, and then he's looking like he's fighting Fortuna at the next moment, and then Lomachenko raised his head, which of course is going to be the biggest fight financially for Devin Haney. And it's almost like a day by day, it seems to switch who's going to fight who. But I think Haney Lomachenko is a great fight, and I think Haney Linares is a great fight. Where do you sit on that, Ewan?
I think it's a great fight, but if I was Devin Haney, I think I would avoid the angry Vasily Lomachenko like the black bear, because I feel as though Lomachenko is he's the only one in that mix who isn't the next hot prospect. He's the only one that's not being talked about, who isn't in the social media spotlight, who isn't having the likes of Triller bid however many $1 million, $6 million on his fights. He's not the flavour of the month. He's not the flavour of the moment. And that man is a dangerous, dangerous operator. The guy who is forgotten, the guy who is written off. We've seen it 100 times. You know, you don't write off a guy with the skills of Vasily Lomachenko. So I think he's the real dark horse. From being the brightest light in the lightweight division, he's gone to being a dark horse. You know, and one loss to the best guy is absolutely nothing. Over 12 rounds as well against a guy who's much bigger than he was. I think Devin Haney would do a lot worse than to stay away from Lomachenko, because whoever gets him in the ring on the way back is gonna be in for a rough one. But yeah, I think Devin Haney is doing a lot of calling people out, a lot of getting his belts via email, a lot of Twitter, a lot of Instagram, but not a lot of fighting. Not a lot of fighting top contenders. Not a lot of actually signing contracts and fighting people and paying his dues. And I don't like to see that. You know, he's got all the talent in the world. He really does. He might have more talent than all of the rest of them. Do you know what I mean? But actually, he's got the worst resume, and he's got the least kind of proven record at the top level. So he has to go and prove himself, whether that's against Lomachenko or whether it's against Linares. I think he needs to prove something, and with a big statement. So hopefully he can stop talking and actually fight someone. But yeah, if I was him, I would not be fighting Vasily Lomachenko.
Definitely, we look forward to the return of Lomachenko. Another great win for Claressa Shields last Friday, Ewan. She picked up we say it as if it's just a matter of fact, but she picked up the undisputed super welterweight world titles against Eva Marie Decar with a unanimous points victory. She won every single round on all three judges' scorecards, and she's quickly becoming, you know, a bona fide legend, you know, a living legend. She's with 25, 26 years of age. She's beat all comers, two-time Olympic gold medalist, very well outspoken, very marketable. She's very, very confident. There's talks of her this week saying that she's standing there with Gennady Golovkin, that she thinks she'd beat Sean Porter, that she thinks she'd beat Keith Thurman. So she's full of confidence. But yeah, Ewan, what an achievement to say that she's a two-weight undisputed world champion, first and foremost.
It is a great achievement. You know, you can't deny the things that she's gone on to do, you know, at the Olympics, and then to go on and do what she's done in the professional ranks is mightily impressive. You know, she's for all comers, and you know, she hasn't always had the greatest of opposition, but that's not her fault. You know, everybody they've put her in against, she's beaten, and so you have to just respect the accomplishments, respect the achievements, and she has continued to be, you know, one of the leading lights alongside Katie Taylor. And unlike Katie Taylor, she's got a lot more of a career left.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that caught my eye this week, Ewan, and it was an article on Sky Sports, and funny you should mention Katie Taylor there, but there was talk of Claressa Shields and Katie Taylor maybe meeting somewhere around 147 pounds. And I think from a physical, like, viewing standpoint, they seem to be miles apart. You know, Claressa Shields is a much bigger lady than Katie Taylor. You know, skill-wise, it's a very competitive fight, but, you know, this is chestnut checkers, and it's not going to work out that way. I think the size differential is just a bit too big. If Claressa Shields has come down to 147 after fighting at 160, you know, it's quite a weight drain. And Katie Taylor, again, she's fought down at lightweight. She pushes it up to 140. Could she really push it up to 147 to fight somebody as big and as skillful as Claressa Shields? I'm not too sure.
It's a really hard one, isn't it? Because, like I said, there's such a kind of again, I hesitate to do this because we were talking earlier, I have a lot of time for the women's game. I think that it's vastly improving, and I think that it's vastly improved from even where it was when Claressa Shields and Katie Taylor started. But there hasn't been the depth of competition that we would like to see. And actually, when you start to think about the differential and we translate it back to the male game, this is like, so we talked about Vasily Lomachenko. He's a guy like Katie Taylor who's come up from featherweight, up to lightweight, might push 140 maximum, right? And then a guy who's competed at middleweight and junior middleweight. It's like having Gennady Golovkin versus Vasily Lomachenko, or a guy like maybe Canelo, who's one of the best in the world, fighting the likes of Teofimo Lopez. It's such, you think about that size when you translate it to men. We think about it as being closer because there's fewer female names, but actually that differential in weight is so big. I wouldn't like to see that for Katie Taylor's sake, because I think Katie Taylor's a more skilled professional than Claressa Shields. But the old adage, a good big one always beats a good little one, and that differential is so big. Katie Taylor was outsized against Pia Suna at lightweight. What is she going to be like against a 160 or maybe even a 168 fighter? Like Claressa Shields has fought 168 before. That is a big, big, big jump in terms of just physical stature. So again, I don't think I want to see that fight for Katie Taylor's sake, just as a big Katie Taylor fan. But I understand that it's a difficult situation that Claressa Shields is now in, with very few fighters north of welterweight.
Well, there's certainly one name that stands out, Ewan, and the one that we all clamour to see is Savannah Marshall, the only lady to hold a victory over Claressa Shields back in the amateur days. But it's much more than that. This isn't just, let's get Claressa Shields a bit of revenge over somebody to beat her back in the amateur days. Savannah Marshall was a bona fide world champion, world-class boxer who put on a great performance against Hannah Rankin, who's a good friend of Claressa Shields. Also, while we're on that subject, shout out to Hannah Rankin. She's fighting out in South Africa this Friday. We can catch that over on her social media. There's pay-per-view details over there, so check that one out. But yeah, Hannah Rankin's good friends of Claressa Shields, and she's a big advocate of Claressa Shields beating Savannah Marshall. Obviously, over here in the UK, we hear a lot of hype and a lot of support for Savannah. I see that as a truly 50-50 fight. I think Savannah Marshall is more than ready for that kind of challenge. I think Savannah is looked down on by Claressa Shields, but Claressa Shields has that kind of attitude, like similar to Floyd Mayweather, similar to Errol Spence, the kind of brash, braggadocious American attitude where they look down on people. But yeah, I think that's a great fight. And I think, as you say, skill-wise, Katie Taylor, Claressa Shields is a very evenly matched fight in terms of skills, but in terms of stature, physical stature, it's not going to really be beneficial to Katie Taylor. So why not look at Savannah Marshall, who's a much more relevant rival for Claressa Shields in that weight class?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, the talent is thin north of welterweight. That's absolutely true. Women just aren't as big as men, so you're bound to have more talent at smaller weight classes. That's just fact. But when you look around north of 147, there is one name that stands out, and it's Savannah Marshall, and she's just got a fantastic knockout win over Hannah Rankin, who Claressa Shields, kind of had a hands full with, if we're honest. She beat her handily, but it was a points decision, and Hannah Rankin had success in that fight, whereas Hannah Rankin had little to no success in the Savannah Marshall fight. Savannah Marshall was really good that night. That's not slight on Hannah Rankin. She's a top professional, but it just shows you how good Savannah Marshall was that night. I think that is the only fight to make in boxing for Claressa Shields. I know she's flirting with MMA, training down with John Jones in Albuquerque. That's obviously something that we'll have to consider later down the line. But, if you've got one fight left in boxing, make it Savannah Marshall, because she's the best challenger for you at your weight class. We talk about, even McCaskill's too small for Claressa Shields. The only challenge that is a legitimate challenge at your weight is Savannah Marshall. So fight her, and let's do it sooner rather than later. I really think that's a great fight, and I think that there's potential for like trilogies and super fights there. I think it's genuinely got mega fight potential.
It really has. So let's go from the brilliant to the bizarre, Ewan. And for a long time at SimBoxx, and myself personally, we tried steering away from the YouTuber stuff and the KSI against Logan Paul fight. We never really covered that. The Logan Paul Floyd Mayweather thing, we mentioned it just simply because it was Floyd Mayweather. Jake Paul fighting whoever he's been fighting on these YouTube cards. We've kind of stayed away from it, but it's coming to the point now where we can't ignore it. Jake Paul, love him or hate him, he's very relevant. He's doing a lot of self-promoting. He's got a huge following, of course, through his YouTube work. The kid seems to be able to fight a little bit against, somewhat mediocre opposition. but he seems to have been stepping up the trash talk this past week. Obviously, he had the back and forth with Conor McGregor that got him a lot of exposure. And this week, it was the turn of Tommy Fury. Now, what I'll go back to first, and it's a guy we know quite well on Twitter. Is it Real Del G, Derek, who put the graphic out there with the viewing figures? It was made up. It was, glorified trolling. Somehow, Tyson Fury's come across this. It was done on a notes app on iPhone, for God's sake, and it listed Canelo was having 60,000 views. It listed Tommy Fury is having 20,000 views, and then it had Canelo around 60,000 views. It had a couple of other cards, and then it had Tommy Fury at 1.9 million views, and this was took as real. And Tyson Fury's champion, Tommy Fury, saying, "Look at these viewing figures, it's unbelievable, oh my God," and then said, "Jake Paul, where you're at." I don't know where to start with picking the bones of this. The heavyweight world champion being trolled by some made-up viewing figures, the fact that he's calling out a YouTuber for his pro boxing little brother, Ewan. It's quite a bizarre situation. It was super humorous. Like, I loved it. I loved the backlash that we got on social media because of it. But yeah, first and foremost, Jake Paul is making a lot of noise. He's making himself relevant in boxing. We've got to give him that. Jake Paul, Tommy Fury, coming to a screen near you soon.
I'm going to put a petition together to get Del G 10% finder's fee, because that is absolutely incredible piece of Twitter power. Just shows you how powerful Twitter can be in the hands of someone funny. No, I love it. But ultimately, actually, I like this fight. It's the first one of the YouTube fights where I'm like YouTubers fighting each other. I don't like it because it's like glorified white collar. It's a bit rubbish, right? YouTubers who suddenly decide they're going to be professional boxers, like, don't really like it because you're not a professional boxer. But if you want to be a professional boxer, a 2-0 guy and a 5-0 guy, if they were just two British prospects, a 2-0 guy, a 5-0 guy, who didn't have a great amateur pedigree, but they thought, sod it, we're going to get in with each other, see who's the real deal. If this was on the undercard of a Frank Warren show or an Eddie Hearn show, you wouldn't mind it, would you? You'd be like, oh, young prospects, a bit early, but they're getting in with it. Fine, absolutely fine. Conor McGregor, too far. Canelo or whoever Jake Paul wants to call out, he'll probably call out Tyson Fury soon. Like, you can call out everyone, but actually, a guy that's his size, that is a boxer, who is limited in experience, why not? Let's have it. Also, I'm quite happy to say let's have it, because I think Tommy Fury will absolutely smash him to bits. But also, they have that crossover appeal. Tommy Fury's got Love Island celebrity. He's got a massive social media following. It's that's the sort of fight that makes sense. They're at a similar sort of level. Obviously, I think Tommy Fury's at a much higher level, but they're at a similar sort of professional level. So why not? Let's have it. And ultimately, it is great fun. If they're at the same level and nobody's going to get hurt, it's great fun, isn't it? So it's all just a bit silly. But yeah, no, definitely Del G 10%.
In a world of where we've got, we mentioned earlier on about Triller and the fights they've been putting on. But in today's world, I see this as a bona fide main event fight. I think this will land. It won't be an undercard fight. I think, given the numbers that are involved, the followings that are involved, let's imagine fans come back and we get this in some sort of arena. If KSI and Logan Paul done 20,000 at the Manchester Arena, Tommy Fury and Jake Paul do the same thing. This is in its own right. I'm not talking it should compete with Lopez Lomachenko or Joshua Fury or Crawford Spence. These kind of big fights that we consider bona fide main events as boxing fans. But in its own right, this is a bona fide pot of money. It's a pot of gold for Frank Warren if he promotes it on behalf of Tommy Fury, or if Eddie Hearn gets involved somewhere, or if Triller get involved again. The money this will make and the numbers this will do, viewing figures this will do, is astronomical. Like, imagine getting Tommy Fury and Jake Paul on one of these face-off programs, or the gloves are off and they're over a table, slagging each other off. Imagine the viewing numbers that'll do. And it's not for the boxing purists, but in terms of pure entertainment, this will do stupid numbers.
Yeah, it's not for, that's it. It's not for us. It's for the little kids that follow them on YouTube. But actually, when it's legitimate boxing, if we've got this two guys who are kind of lower down the pecking order, but they're actually having a boxing match that's actually licensed. Do you know what I mean? I'm not that bothered, but why not put it on? Why not put it on? I think that if you want to draw people to boxing, why not put it on? It does differ from the YouTube fights, in my opinion, because there is a legitimate level of these guys are professionals. They're very, very limited professionals, but it gets a little bit of a pass. And again, it's not like Chocolatito Estrada. It's not going to have the hardcore boxing fans watching it. But we said before with Triller, it's a money game, it's a numbers game. Boxing is about money. And if we can get the likes of, say it's a Frank Warren show, All right. We've got maybe Brad Foster defending his British title, Chris Jenkins defending his British title. You know, if we can get guys like that on the undercard and they get paid through the nose because Tommy Fury, Jake Paul's on the top, I'm all for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Coming to a screen near you soon, we think. Andy Ruiz, Ewan, Andy Ruiz Jr., it looks like he's finally making his comeback. It's all but officially announced that he'll be fighting Chris Arreola, the perennial heavyweight contender. He's been out the ring for a couple of years himself. It looks like that fight's going down April 24th. If you go off what Andy Ruiz has been saying on social media, he's obviously linked up with Eddie Reynoso. He's killing the angle games with the pictures that he's been putting out. He knows how to make himself look slimmer with a selfie. And then you've got Chris Arreola taking a selfie while sat in the toilet. It's quite bizarre. But yeah, it looks like this fight's going down. And personally, I think it's a good fight for Andy Ruiz to come back to. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's the kind of Latin America rivalry, or Latino American rivalry there, given, the both men's heritage. So I think the fight sells well in America in terms of a boxing contest. I think it'll be a little bit one-sided. Arreola's seen better days. Yeah, I just think all around it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. We've seen the likes of Kawanaki, Wilder. We've seen them deal with Arreola. We've seen where he's at. We know where he's at. It's a decent comeback. I would have liked to have seen it earlier from Andy Ruiz, but ultimately linking up with the hottest coach in the world of boxing today is never a bad move. I think that, Eddie Reynoso, we talked about him last week on the podcast, the work he's done with Oscar Valdez, the work he's done with Canelo, obviously. Hopefully we can see Andy Ruiz Jr. back at his best and be a player at heavyweight, because there are a lot of players at heavyweight at the moment. And I think he's a really exciting addition to the mix. I think his style is really, really different to anyone else we have in the top 10. So hopefully he can get back in there. Hopefully we actually see the fight, because again, like I say, nothing's officially announced. But yeah, again, I think Andy Ruiz he wins this one-sidedly if he's anywhere like his best.
Yeah, I think, the heavyweight division comes in for a lot of stick, and we know we used to have three horses at the top in terms of Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder, and that's now become a two-horse race in terms of who's the best on the planet. We're always going to dispute that until we get that fight with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. But that body of fighters underneath, with the likes of Wilder, White, Ruiz, Martin Bacola, spoke to his trainer Billy Nelson today, Hrgovic, Hunter, that's another great fight that's going to happen. Usyk's in the mix. Derek Chisora is always going to be there or thereabouts. Joseph Parker. And we're not talking about the golden era of the 70s, or maybe even the great era of the 90s. These guys aren't going to stand up to them in terms of skill. But in terms of a great group of fighters that are quite evenly matched, Joe Joyce, of course, is in the mix there as well. They're quite evenly matched, and they all need to fight each other to position and to jockey for standing in the rankings, whilst the belts are tied up with Fury and Joshua. I think it's a great era of heavyweight boxing as long as these fight gets made. And I think Andy Ruiz is right in that mix, as you're saying. It'd be good to see him back. And if we get the likes of Chisora and Parker, Hunter, Hrgovic, Usyk, Joyce, and these guys start eliminating each other and we get some sort of formal rankings, I think it's a great era of heavyweight boxing.
I couldn't agree more. I've been saying this for a long, long time, actually, that we are living in an era that is better, that will be remembered by history more fondly than other eras, and than it is treated now. Okay, we don't have anyone nearly as good as Ali or Foreman or Frazier right now, in my opinion. But if you look at the Ali, Foreman, Frazier, that golden era of the 70s, you've got the Swarmer in Frazier, the come forward fighter. You've got the huge puncher in Foreman. You've got the master boxer in Ali. Then you've got wild cards like Ernie Shavers, who's a massive puncher. You've got Ron Lyle, who's a great puncher. The Iron Chin George Chuvalo. That 70s setup, there was always these guys who had different skill sets. And we look down, Ron Lyle was never a great fighter. He was never going to be one of these all-time top 20, top 30 heavyweights, right? We had entertaining fights with Ali. We had one of the great up and down fights with George Foreman. Again, Ron Lyle is just an example. He is a great fighter who did not compete, who couldn't compete with the best, right? Then you look at like an Andy Ruiz. Okay, so he's got one win over Joshua. It's a fantastic win. Maybe he loses to Wilder. Maybe he loses to Fury. Maybe he loses to those sort of guys. But he was an interesting player, and he had an interesting dynamic style that added something. We talk about the 90s, guys like David Tua, Andrew Galotta, guys who were never heavyweight champion, but they had interesting, exciting styles, and they created some of the best nights. guys like Henry Akinwande, like kind of these guys who were never the elite of elite levels, but they added something interesting to that heavyweight mix. They weren't the Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis type guys at the very top, but they added something. Andrew Ruiz is that guy, I think. I think he's added something really, really interesting. I think Wilder is that guy, to be honest, because I don't really think he was, incredible at the top level. I think Fury and Joshua are a higher level than him. But then, Luis Ortiz, Joe Joyce, Usyk, they all have such different styles. The upright of Joe Joyce, the small dynamic boxer of Usyk, the unpredictable power of Povetkin. These guys are adding something to the heavyweight division, and I really hope Andy Ruiz can be that guy. But I think, comparatively, if we look at the kind of the historiography of these different divisions, this one will stack up favourably. When you look back at the likes of who Klitschko fought, the likes of, Bryant Jennings, and towards the end of his career, Kubrat Pulevs of this world, that won't be remembered as a strong era. Post 2015 onwards, post Tyson Fury beating Vladimir Klitschko, this era will be looked upon fondly, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I'm totally in agreement with you. And I think this is where something like the World Boxing Super Series can come into play again. And I think it doesn't have to be, we dream of a day when we're going to have a World Boxing Super Series of Joshua, Fury, Wilder, White, Ortiz, Ruiz, Joyce, off the top of my head. That's not going to happen. But let's go from the 10th position to the 18th position, chucking people there like Joseph Parker, Derek Chisora. And I think if the World Boxing Super Series somehow grasped 8 of these heavyweights and convince them to take part in the World Boxing Super Series heavyweight edition, that would be fantastic, because otherwise, we're going to struggle to get these big fights. And I know, like we say, we're enjoying the kind of era that we're in at the minute, and there is talks of some of these fights coming off, like Usyk, Joyce. But the World Boxing Super Series, one way or another, they force these fights to happen. There's no way around it, and I think that'd be great if promoters, TV companies could get behind the World Boxing Super Series and enforce this somehow. I think that'd be spectacular.
100%, but you look down at the younger guys as well, and there's loads of interesting dynamic names to add to the list. Tony Yoka got a big win on Saturday night. Otto Wallen got a big win 2 weeks ago. Obviously, Dubois is not written off yet. He's a very young guy. Murat Gassiev coming up from heavyweight. He's only in his mid-20s, despite looking about 50. You know what I mean? These guys can get thrown in, and, you've got a huge puncher in Gassiev and huge puncher in Dubois, but, there's questions about Dubois' heart, and then there's guys like Wallen, who doesn't really stop anyone, but, he's got this amazing kind of performance against the best heavyweight on the planet. So you have to look at those guys and think there is a future as well as a past with guys like Ortiz. And mixing those in together, you're going to get exciting style matchups.
Definitely. I think we'll get a petition going through our social media to get Nissa and Calla Sowland on board to get the ball rolling, because there's definitely a lot of desire there for it. Let's talk about another World Boxing Super Series winner in terms of Josh Taylor. He's had his fight announced with Jose Ramirez, the undisputed fight at 140 pounds. It's a fantastic fight. Josh Taylor at 17-0, Jose Ramirez at 26-0. Both guys have legitimate claims to be the number one in the division. You'd argue that Josh Taylor's win over Regis Prograis outdoes anything that Ramirez has done, but his victory over Maurice Hooker and most recently Victor Postol stands him in good stead. I think this is really the number one against the number two. I mentioned on social media maybe that Josh Taylor's victory over Prograis will be a tougher fight than Ramirez. That remains to be seen, but this is a bona fide number one against number two in the division. And if Josh Taylor becomes undisputed champion in 18 fights, I think he's rivaling the very best in the world in terms of pound for pound rankings. It's a fantastic achievement.
Absolutely. 100%. You have to recognize what Josh Taylor's done. He crazy opinions on Twitter aside, what he's done in the ring is absolutely phenomenal. It is, he's already, in my opinion, putting himself up there with the likes of, guys like Jim Watt, Ken Buchanan, as these Scottish greats. He's beaten Postol already. He's beaten Prograis. He's beaten everybody that they've put him in with. And now he's taking on the only... Pardon?
He beat the great O'Hara Davis.
I love watching that one because he beat the living daylights out of Davis, and I'll watch that. I watch that every day of the week. But no, he's now facing the only legitimate test left at 140 pounds. This is the danger guy. This is the guy no one wants to face. He's beaten everybody. He's beaten everybody else that nobody wanted to face, one after another, and now he does it again. Everybody that's got an undefeated record, he's beaten them. Everybody that's got a legitimate world ranking, he's beaten them. There's only one left, and it's Jose Ramirez. And he's taken that fight, and he needs massive props for taking that fight, but as does Jose Ramirez. How many times have we seen American champions sit at PBC or at top rank and defend against mediocre opposition again and again and again and not bother about the number one contender or the other champion that's over there. In the last 10 years, we've seen it repeated over and over again. Jose Ramirez has gone, no, I want to fight that guy. And Josh Taylor's gone, no, I want to fight that guy. And now we've only got 2 left. And we get to see who's number one. It's everything we want from boxing. Also, we've got beautiful clash of styles in there as well. You know, it could be 2 boxers or 2 punches. Jose Ramirez is a powerful puncher. He's the bull in the china shop. He's coming forward. He's coming at you. Josh Taylor is a master boxer with a beautiful inside game and a fantastic cerebral fighting IQ. I'm so excited for this fight. You know, it is a phenomenal back and forth battle. I think that although I'm in agreement with you that probably the Prograis fight was maybe tougher for Josh Taylor, and I think that Josh Taylor will come through this, ultimately, if Prograis was the last guy, then Josh Taylor would have fought him. He's beaten Prograis. Now Ramirez is the last guy, and we have to see it.
Yeah, hats off to both guys. It goes down May 22nd. Touching on Regis Prograis there, and we've got to take these Twitter spats with a pinch of salt because they kind of come and go as quickly as each other. One day 2 fighters are beefing with each other, and the next day they're friends again. But the past 24, 48 hours has seen a bit of a left field argument with Regis Prograis and Gervonta Tank Davis. We're talking about Tank Davis that's been operating anywhere between 126 and 135 pounds over the past few years, and Regis Prograis is a huge 140 pounder that's, I think, moving up to 147. But yeah, there was one of these mythical posts put out by another Twitter page. We used to do our What If Wednesdays, and they do quite well. And obviously, every boxing fan likes to debate who would have won Mike Tyson, Ali, Frocho Groves, this, that, or the other. And this one was Regis Prograis against Tank Davis, which I thought was a bit left field given the disparity in weight. And Gervonta Davis has come across it and said, I'll beat that boy. And Prograis went off in response. Ewan, do you think this fight has any legs in it? Do you think it's a possibility?
No, no. I think that left long enough in a room on his own with a mirror, Gervonta Davis would fight his reflection. I seriously think that these guys, they're just fighters. They're just animals. They're just those guys. They're those guys. They want to fight. They want to fight. They've got that instinct. They were brought up hard, both of them. One in Baltimore, one in New Orleans. They've had hard lives. They're hard people. They are good at fighting, and they will fight each other. And neither one can resist calling out anyone. Honestly, I think if you left, again, Regis Prograis, if you said you've got to fight Tyson Fury, go and fight him, he'd have a go because he's a fighter. He's a fighting man. I think it doesn't matter the weights. I think that Gervonta Davis couldn't see a kind of proposed matchup and not say, I would win. And Regis Prograis couldn't see a call out and without firing back. I think it's just the nature of the people that they are. And I don't think there's any legs in it as a fight. I think Prograis is a 140 or a 147 pound fighter. And Gervonta Davis is a 130 or 135 pound fighter. I think that's their limits. I know Gervonta blows up, but in terms of competitiveness, I think 135 is his ceiling.
I think that's very well articulated there, Ewan. I think certainly from my point of view, I think a much more realistic fight, going off on a bit of a tangent, would be Regis Prograis and Adrian Broner. He's a good friend of Tank Davis. I think there was reference made by Prograis in a few cryptic tweets that he backhanded disses, if you like, for Broner. I think he called him his Tank's big sister or something like that, words to that effect. But yeah, I think certainly Regis Prograis against Adrian Broner is a much more realistic fight. And I think for what it's worth, Broner is what he is. But I'd love to see him in there with Prograis. I think Prograis put a whooping on him, and I think he'd be the first man to stop Adrian Broner. But yeah, I think that's a more realistic fight.
If you can't get Regis Prograis anything meaningful at 140, why not watch him knock out Broner? That might be quite a lot of fun. I mean, I don't think it's a competitive fight, but I tell you what, the press conference will be competitive. I think that, like I say, with Prograis, he's one of those who don't back down from a challenge. So if Broner gets in his face and challenges him, I think we'll see a real fight. So no, I like it. I think it's more relevant 140 than Tank Davis is.
So before we get into our breakdown or our little discussion on the Matchroom card coming this weekend, Ewan, I think this is ideal time to plug our most recent episode of The Sweet Science with SimBoxx, arguably the episode that's most close to your heart, given that it's the fight of the century, arguably the most significant fight to ever take place in a boxing ring. Muhammad Ali against Joe Frazier won March 8th, 1971, Madison Square Garden. Ewan, what a great fight. What a, as I say, such a significant fight with its cultural and political impact. I hope we've done justice with our Sweet Science breakdown. But yeah, just touching on that fight, Ewan.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing it for the Sweet Science for SimBoxx. It was incredible, but you can't understate the kind of the psychological impact of that fight. Ali was the counterculture. He was hated. He was lauded by those in the kind of anti-Vietnam War movement, the left in America, liberalism in America, but he was equally despised by the authority. J. Edgar Hoover had an FBI file on Muhammad Ali as a dangerous internal threat. You can't underestimate the kind of the powers that got behind Joe Frazier, and then also the kind of this wave of counterculture in the early 70s, the hippie movement, all of the nuclear disarmament movement, the anti-war movement that was trying to stop the Vietnam War, which would ultimately finish in 1975. That swell of cultural forces that collided in the ring, that suddenly, for the first time in the history of boxing, two undisputed heavyweight champions took on one another, both of them with a legitimate claim to be the heavyweight champion. It is such a seismic event in boxing, and such a seismic event in the cultural zeitgeist of the world, that it's an honor to be able to kind of reflect that back in us covering boxing at the time. And I know we weren't covering boxing in 1971. I'm sure I personally would have loved to have been, but the chance to remember that anniversary and with a kind of historical view, look back at the impact that fight had and the impact that it still has today. Things like the Muhammad Ali Act, they're relevant news in boxing today. His impact is continuing. Joe Frazier's impact is continuing. And I think to just kind of pause and honor kind of essentially the Mount Rushmore of boxing in the 1970s heavyweight division, the guys who made the sport what it is today, is really important.
Definitely. I think, someone as myself that's not as historically knowledgeable as yourself, is still aware of the significance of that fight. You've got the likes of Hagler Hearns that come afterwards in the fights with the Fabulous Four, the Four Kings. You had Tyson against Lewis, you had Mayweather and Pacquiao, but these, great fights, huge occasions in their own right, but they pale in significance to the fight of the century.
Absolutely. We've had great boxing matches, and we've had these kind of huge events in boxing since, the crossover into the mainstream. But only a couple of times in history, only with Ali and Foreman and Ali and Frazier, and then Lewis and Schmeling, have we had these kind of giant geopolitical forces battle it out in the ring. And that is what happened 50 years ago today. And I think it's really important that we kind of check that box and remember that boxing at one point, was the be all and end all of politics, of pop culture, of everything that everything, society at large.
Absolutely. And I implore our listeners to check that out over on the SimBoxx YouTube channel. Make sure you drop a subscribe to the channel over there as well, as we continue to bring you more content as we go along. Ewan, this Saturday, we mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast, Matchroom return to American boxing with a stunning triple header of world title fights. We've got the unified super flyweight title headlining the card with Juan Estrada rematching Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. Estrada 41 wins, 3 losses. Roman Gonzalez 50 wins, 2 losses. For a long time, he looked like he was going to surpass Mayweather's 50-0 record, but that wasn't to be. We'll touch on that. On the undercard or co-main event, however you want to look at it, there's the Jessica McCaskill against Cecilia Brackhouse rematch for the undisputed welterweight world title fight. And then we've got Kyle Gucci making his Matchroom debut, taking on Vega as well. I think that's the light flyweight title. So yeah, 3 world title fights, 3 huge fights, certainly a massive main event and a massive co-main event. But then we've also got the likes of Amo Williams on the undercard in a step-up fight against Douglas. Is it Douglas? I think I pronounced his name right. Or Dennis Douglin, who's been in there with some top operators. Ray Ford is in there as well. So yeah, I think it's a good mix of established, bona fide main event fights and also some exciting prospects on the undercard.
Yeah, absolutely. We all know that the 2 guys at the lighter weights at the moment are, there's obviously a lot of talent out of Japan, the likes of Inoue, and then obviously Horiguchi on this card as well. But 2 of the most exciting guys, 2 of the most enduring names of the little men of recent times are Estrada and Chocolatito, guys who are, in the Indian summer of their career now. They're kind of having this resurgence, but they're both resurging at the same time, despite kind of clashing at their peak in 2012, almost 9 years ago. Now they've resurged and they're both now almost back at their peak, looking excellent and fighting for world titles again. It's a really exciting fight. And then also because there is kind of, not as many people know it as the kind of maybe heavier weight guys, they've stacked the card up with a lot of talent and a lot of big names. So I think it's a really exciting fight. I'll definitely be getting up to watch it. And ultimately, the best thing about these little guys is their proficiency and the kind of the smoothness with which they operate, both Estrada and Chocolatito. It's easy on the eye boxing. It's good to watch boxing. So, yeah, I can't wait for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, you see some of these lighter weights down at flyweight and such, and you think, you look at Estrada and Gonzalez, they fought almost 100 times professionally between them, and they've only suffered 5 combined losses. But they fight pre-lockdown, of course, pre-pandemic, so frequently. And there's a lot of, with all due respect, cannon fodder down there. But every now and then, one of them creeps out the pack and turns out to be, for real, making reference to Rungvisai, who he was spectacular in knocking out Roman Gonzalez. He beat him twice. And in the rematch, when it was like Roman Gonzalez is going to get his revenge, he was spectacularly knocked out. And at that point, Roman Gonzalez looked like he had his day. He was 46-0. He lost 2 consecutive fights to Rungvisai. And then he fought Kal Yafai, Britain's world champion. And it looked like this was almost like in boxing, we say time and time again, it's all about timing. And this looked like Kal Yafai was getting Roman Gonzalez at the right time. As it was, he walked into a rejuvenated Roman Gonzalez. He was knocked out in, I think it was 9 rounds. And here we are now with Roman Gonzalez looking to re-establish himself atop the super flyweight division, which in itself is a stacked division. We had on New Year's Eve just past Ioka against Tanaka. What a great fight that was. And these guys are flag bearers, the likes of Estrada and Gonzalez, for the likes of Inoue, the likes of Ioka. These guys at the smaller weights that are now getting the acclaim that they so rightly deserve will look back, in coming years, we'll look back at today's era and think Roman Gonzalez was a flag bearer for the flyweight division. You got the likes of Charlie Edwards and Sonny Edwards lower down in the rankings at super flyweight, and you just think it's an exciting time. And finally, these guys, these smaller guys, small in stature, but not in personality and not in ability, of course, but they're finally getting the acclaim, giving it the headlining shows. And I just think this is such a fantastic fight. The rematch was 9 years ago. You might know better than me, but is there any other fights that have kept such significance to fight and then rematch 9 years later? I can't think off the top of my head.
You put me on a bit of the spot there. I wish I'd have looked at, but no, it is a phenomenal feat to kind of still be at the top of your game, to still be at the top of the rankings 10 years after you fought at the top of the rankings. I think that there's going to be very few times we can think about that. But yeah, looking down that super flyweight ledger, there is stacked with talent. And I think that I don't want to look past the main event on Saturday night, because I'm sure it will be a phenomenal fight when it happens. But the talent that is out there, Ioka was supremely impressive against Tanaka, but Tanaka was great in that fight, and he's got a long future at this weight class. He's only growing into his abilities. You've always got a firecracker that's Rungvisai. You never know which Rungvisai you're going to get, whether he's going to knock the best fighters in the world out or whether he's just not going to show. So you've got that, and then you move down, and then we had that fantastic performance from Andrew Maloney, who definitely beat, but the Nevada State Athletic Commission didn't agree, Joshua Franco in a masterful performance. I want to see him in the mix at the top level. Honestly, we talked about Claressa Shields and the Super Series, not to get off track, but my God, would I like a super flyweight series? What an incredible one that would be. But the guy who goes in as the number 1 seed is the guy who wins on Saturday night, because what a fight we've got. And ultimately, I think that it's just going to engage people in the little men, because on DAZN, $1.99 in this country, go on, wake up in the middle of the night, stick on some boxing, see what's happening, and then you'll see two masters at work, 2 chess masters playing against each other at the highest of levels.
Absolutely. I think interestingly, there's the Rungvisai he's fighting also this weekend. He's fighting in Thailand. Admittedly, not as high profile opponent as anybody like Estrada or Gonzalez, but I think there's definitely legs in a Rungvisai fight with the winner on Saturday. So further down the card, Jessica McCaskill, she scored a massive upset, let's be honest, last August when she beat Cecilia Brackhouse. Brackhouse seemingly was unstoppable at welterweight, 36-0, before she fought McCaskill. McCaskill, of course, a couple of losses on the record, one being to Katie Taylor, and it seemed inevitable that Brackhouse was being positioned for Katie Taylor. It seemed like that for a long time. If the Amanda Serrano fight didn't come off for Katie Taylor, that it'd be Cecilia Brackhouse. That was the legacy-defining fight for Katie Taylor, which it very much would be if Cecilia Brackhouse picks up the titles again this weekend. But yeah, undisputed at welterweight. Great accomplishment for Jessica McCaskill. She's got a great story behind her. And again, this fight is you know, for McCaskill, her reward for getting that victory last time out, she scored the upset, and now she goes back in, to use the words of Tony Bellew with the rematch of David Haye, with the salt and pepper on her side of the table. And no doubt she'll get a career high payday, and she'll go in there full of confidence, having scored the biggest of upsets last time out.
Yeah, exactly. She's got to take, you know, she's got such an interesting story, Jessica McCaskill. She's got to take ultimate confidence from how well she did last time. And it's going to be a really intriguing fight because McCaskill's obviously riding this high. She's, you know, she won last time. She pulled out the performance of her life. We've never seen a performer at that level. But Brackhouse, obviously, she's got all that accomplishment, but she is 39. She is starting to maybe look on the wane. You know, it's a really interesting crossroads fight, whether Jessica McCaskill is just getting better or whether she just had, she was maybe overlooked by Brackhouse. You don't know. So I think either of them, if they win, is a great fight for Katie Taylor, whether that's 140 or 147. I know we said we would like to see a bigger fighter come down from 147 earlier in the podcast, but maybe if Katie Taylor fights a 147-pound fighter, obviously she's got history with McCaskill. I like that fight. And there's big fights, but also the idea that we can push these big fights later down the line, again, shows how healthy women's boxing is. But yeah, I think it's a really good fight. I think Jessica McCaskill has got a number. If I'm honest, I think that she'll rubber stamp her performance from last time. But it's an intriguing fight and it's a great co-main.
Definitely, we look forward to Saturday. You and a couple of things I want to touch on before we close off today. And there's been little murmurs on social media, and I think it's really interesting when you kind of get a bit of conflict or a bit of back and forth or a little bit of a rumor. A couple of things that I want to touch on. We keep mentioning Katie Taylor, but it looks very likely that Tasha Jonas, Katie Taylor is going to happen next. There's been nothing official, but if you read between the lines of some Eddie Hearn interviews, some Joe Gallagher interviews, some Tasha Jonas interviews, of course, Katie Taylor's not really that kind of outspoken, on camera, braggadocious, calling people out, but the people around her, promoter, Tasha Jonas, as I say, Joe Gallagher, Eddie Hearn. If you read between the lines of what these guys and these ladies are saying, it looks very likely that the fight comes off next. They fought in the Olympics, of course, and I think that's got a great fight written all over it.
I've got mixed feelings towards it, if I'm honest, because ultimately I think Tasha Jonas is a featherweight, and I think that she deserves a rematch of a fight that she won against Terry Harper for a world title, because that was there was some terrible scorecards on that one. And I thought that Tasha Jonas won it. I'd like to see that rematch. I think that's two ladies who are brilliant British fighters at their natural weight. I think Katie Taylor is naturally bigger now than Tash, and I think that's a less competitive fight. Granted, it will be a great fight, and obviously we'll get behind it, but I would prefer the rematch. But obviously I know that that's not on Eddie's cards. I think legacy for Katie Taylor now is what Eddie's concerned about. So, you know, so be it, but I'm not necessarily completely on board with that one.
I think, you know, and especially when we have like a quieter than usual podcast like we do now, we love to go on tangents anyway, but it's prime time for it now. Why has Tasha Jonas not got the rematch with Terry Harper in a day and age when rematches are all the rage? You look at White Povetkin, you look at Ruiz Joshua. We've spoken about it before, about these needs for rematches that the clauses are put into the contracts, be it a one-sided win or be it a close contentious points win. We get rematches left, right and centre. Wilder Fury, again, another example. But in such a closely contested fight, Tasha Jonas, for me, won that fight against Terry Harper. I love Terry Harper. I love her story. Her relationship with Steffi Bull's fantastic. No qualms against them, no disrespect to them, but it's a sporting contest. And in my opinion, she lost that sporting contest. But in what way do we get... It's almost bizarre to think Tasha Jonas doesn't get the rematch she deserves with Terry Harper in a more naturally suited weight class, but she's almost rewarded by being given maybe the biggest test in women's boxing in Katie Taylor. So it's almost like a backhanded compliment that she's been given this challenge against Katie Taylor, but why not just give her what she rightly deserves, which is the rematch against Terry Harper? It's such a bizarre situation. You know, you couldn't imagine, for instance, Marcus Maidana, when he gave Floyd Mayweather all he could handle at welterweight. Imagine if Floyd didn't give him the rematch, but then Canelo at 154 said, Maidana, you can step up and fight me. It doesn't make sense. You know, you got the rematch because he was close in a fight with Floyd Mayweather. And again, I'm going off on tangents, comparisons and whatever else, but it all boils down to, why didn't Tasha Jonas get the rematch with Terry Harper?
It shows the difference between boxing and other sports, in my opinion. You know, like we talk about, obviously I know you're a big football fan. In football, you all play each other the same amount of times in a season unless you're meeting a cup. Do you know what I mean? You basically, there's... Realistically, if football was like boxing and it was all about matchmaking, you know, Liverpool and City and United and Tottenham would play each other every weekend, because you try and get these big guys and try and get the big money fights and all this. Terry Harper has been future-proofed because she's so young and she's so good, so young. To even be able to, at her age, even be able to compete with Natasha Jonas is an incredible feat in itself. So the fact that she's competed, she's learned from that fight, she's getting better. They don't want her to lose. They want her to build on that and get better and better and better, and then have the two ladies who are towards the end of their career, Natasha Jonas and Kate Taylor, them fight for legacy. It's about business, and it's about that kind of narrative arc of Terry Harper. But in other sports, you don't necessarily have that same narrative arc, and you can't build a career around a story in the way that you can with boxing. Terry Harper's her, she's so likable, and she's got such a kind of great story coming out of the fish and chip shop and all. Like, she's just got such a story that they can then scaffold her career around that in a way that other sports don't have that. And that's the reason she's not in a rematch, because Tasha might beat her in the rematch. It was really close in the first one. So you want to tell the right story for your business. And that, I understand, if I was Eddie Hearn, I'd be doing the same thing, but I'm not. And I want to see the sport. I want to see the sport at the highest level. But ultimately, if you want to keep making money and keep selling pay-per-views, you've got to build these fighters up. And I understand why he's done it.
It's the interest, and it's the business side of boxing that raises its head, and we will forever dispute that. Also on social media, again, such a pool of bullshit sometimes, or genuine stories sometimes. Every now and then, you can grasp at straws. But one that seems to have come to fruition that started on social media was the news that Liam Smith reportedly has left Joe Gallagher. And again, I've watched a couple of interviews, read a couple of articles, and this is all but confirmed. It seems that Liam Smith is currently out training with Manny Robles, that Joe Gallagher wasn't really aware of this, that there's been instances in the past where Liam Smith or Scott Quigg or Anthony Crawler would go and train with other trainers if they're in a different country to pick up a bit of experience. But it would always be run by Joe Gallagher. He runs a tight ship at Gallagher's gym, and he very much oversees everything that goes on. So, yeah, he seemed to be a bit left field at first, that he didn't really know much of it. And then, the most recent interviews that I've seen is that he's all but confirmed. It seems Liam Smith is out with Manny Robles, and it just seems a matter of time before it's confirmed that the split happens. It seems to be such a tight-knit bunch there at the Gallagher's gym, and it makes you question what next for Callum Smith, given that he's coming off the loss to Canelo. Do you think, why now for Liam Smith? He's been out of the ring for a long while. Has he put his inactivity down to Joe Gallagher and that kind of fractured relationship with Eddie Hearn? Is he blamed that more on Gallagher than maybe Hearn? Who knows? But yeah, it's a bit of a bizarre situation, Ewan.
It's a bizarre situation, and I really like Beefy. I think he's a really talented fighter, and I think he's a nice individual as well. I wouldn't want to wish an argument or a split on them. Obviously they've had quite a lot of success together in the past. Joe's obviously trained all four Smith brothers. I wouldn't like this to be a fractious split between the Gallagher and the Smiths. That's the last thing I'd want to see. But ultimately, Liam Smith is a fighter. Liam Smith is in the Liam Smith business. He's not in the Joe Gallagher business. He's not in the Eddie Hearn business. He's not in the Frank Warren business. He's in the Liam Smith business. And if he thinks that he can train a different way, get a big fight, get a lot of money, get a world title, that sort of thing, if he thinks that's the way to do that, more power to him. Because his career, Joe Gallagher has been training fighters for a long time before he had Liam Smith, and he'll be training fighters for a long time after he has Liam Smith. He's in the Joe Gallagher business, you know what I mean? Liam Smith has a very finite amount of time left to make a difference in his career. If he thinks that this is how he's going to do it, go for it, because, he deserves to be able to fight the big names, because, his ledger is very, very impressive, but ultimately it's sometimes kind of outside of that Canelo fight. He's never really had a world title fight that he could really get his teeth into. So hopefully that's what he's aiming for, and he's kind of changing it up. But yeah, again, I don't want to kind of encourage. I feel as though the split thing is quite divisive, but I wish them both the best. But if Liam Smith thinks it's the best for his career, go for it.
Absolutely. So Ewan, we look forward to a busy end to the month of March, given it was such a slow start. We've got Okole against Glowacki. We've got White Povetkin. We've got a couple of great shows from Frank Warren, and we've got a busy back end to the month. We've got obviously this triple header this Saturday And we look forward to boxing picking back up again. It should be a busy time. It's always a pleasure discussing boxing with you on the podcast. I implore our listeners to check us out on our social media platforms, give this a like, a share. And also, it's not something we ask a lot for, but if you can just leave a review and a rating, whether you listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, it all helps as we continue to grow and expand and learn. So yeah, any feedback is much welcome. Ewan, it's been a pleasure.
Cheers, mate.
Hi guys, welcome to this week's episode of Let's Talk Boxing. I'll be your host as always, and I'm joined by Ewan. It's a bit of a quiet time given that we've had quite a lot of boxing to start off 2021 in February, but we do have a spectacular Matchroom triple header card out in America on DAZN this weekend. But first things first, Ewan, how are you? How's things?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good. Yeah, again, compared to last week when we had 2 chock-a-block weeks of boxing to get stuck into, it is a bit of a quiet one, but the lower weight magicians we've got at the end of this week, so I'm sure we'll get stuck into talking about that.
Definitely. I think, this rematch is years in the making. Juan Estrada against Roman Gonzalez, Chocolatito. It's the unified super flyweight world title fight. I think they fought first back in 2012. And like you said, we'll get into that a little bit later on, but let's get into some of the latest goings on, some of the latest headlines in boxing. And Triller, this boxing platform, this media platform